It is always very difficult to speak last because much has been said already. But nonetheless, thank you for the opportunity to contribute to this momentous occasion whereby Mauritius is attempting to modify its higher education landscape. I would have wished to be in a position to congratulate the Honorable Minister of Education for having finally brought for debate in this House, slightly more than a week ago, such an overhauling of an important sector through a bill that was announced almost 3 years ago. But there are flaws in this bill. I will fail in my duties towards the democratic traditions of this country and to the people who have spoken or written to me about them if I do not bring these flaws forward for consideration, for discussions, and for amendment tonight. But first, I would like to bring us down memory lane by citing an extract of the speech from the throne of 15 September 1967, before I was born, when many, especially in those days, the Honorable Les Sages, who did not like the idea of the university in Mauritius. Those days, Madam Speaker, many were those who thought that we could all send our children to Great Britain, France, or the USA, or India. But like Sir Siu Sagar Angulam said in that particular speech, can you afford not to afford a university? And then the University of Mauritius was set up. 20 years later, I had the chance to be the first batch to enroll for BTech engineering at the time the University of Mauritius became free. So that was a long time ago, in 1988, in fact. The University of Mauritius was considered a flagship institution at that time, and enrolling there was demanding in terms of grades. But today, things have changed. 1 year later, I obtained a seat at the National University of Singapore, and in 1993, I finally graduated 4 years later with an engineering degree from the Nanyang Technological University. So I've known the system of two countries' university, how they have evolved over the last 2 decades. I was reading the last alumni magazine that we received, and in there I was pleasantly surprised to see that the Nanyang Technological University is today ranked 11th worldwide on the QS World University Ranking, and first in Asia. And the National University of Singapore is 15th worldwide. But like the Honorable, my Honorable friend said just now, University of Mauritius has gone down. I think Honorable Balamudi said 2,564 worldwide. True enough, the ranking of the university does not make the quality of the graduate. But then, at a time when it was said earlier, I think by the Honorable Jumai, that we have in 1 or 2 graduate chômeurs in Mauritius, and that we need to look up at the international market, the ranking of the university sometimes make a lot of difference. So there is much to be done there. Madam Speaker, I would have hoped that this bill would have restored this situation. But I wonder whether it does, because there are, to my views, like I said earlier, flaws in it, and at times they are serious, both in terms of approach and content. They are multiple and insidious, and they operate at different levels, as I will now describe. I will start by highlighting, to my view, what I consider to be the huge gaps brought by this bill, then show the different measures serving to deepen the fractures, and finally demonstrate how the nitty-gritty hidden instruments serves to maintain these fractures. Let me therefore go to the first level, the meta level. Let me introduce, at this stage, Madam Speaker, the fractures. At the meta level, at the explanatory memorandum itself, the purported object of this bill is to repeal the Tertiary Education Commission Act and to enact a reformed, modern, and appropriate legislative framework so as to ensure better control and regulation of the higher education sector in Mauritius. However, given the approach to the development of this bill, it was said earlier in this House, and it was much debated, that there were no proper consultations. We heard there were PowerPoint presentations, we've heard there was a workshop, but I will appeal to the Minister to explain to us later what processes has been followed, what consultations have been followed, so that the extent of consultation, and even if there were groups challenging the bill, so that we can know once and for all and sum up on this part of the debate that we've extensively discussed about. Secondly, Madam Speaker, even before listening to the Honourable Minister this afternoon, I already had the impression that the drafting of this bill was done by a foreigner. And I've confirmed when I listened to you, Mr. Rahman did the drafting. This is simply, I had that impression because simply the fractures are so apparent that one is under the impression that it can only be a foreigner with little knowledge of the Mauritian context who has drafted the bill, because simply it does not capture the views and felt needs of the Mauritian population. I am not blaming the lack of knowledge of the resource person, nor his competence, but only the lack of knowledge of the local context, which is not reflected in the bill. Thirdly, let us look at the very definition of higher education as per paragraph 2 of the bill, which states that higher education means education offered by a higher institution, conferring qualification for an undergraduate certificate, an undergraduate diploma, a bachelor's degree with honors, a postgraduate certificate, a postgraduate diploma, a master's degree or a doctoral degree or their respective equivalents. This very definition in itself deepens the existing difficulties of grappling with issues like the foundation programs being offered, for instance, by the Open University of Mauritius. Who will audit these? One can see at section 7.1.f provides that the Commission will undertake periodic accreditation audits of higher education institutions. The question remains, Madam Speaker, who will audit the programs? Will it be the Mauritius Qualifications Authority? In fact, what would the role of the MQA be? I sincerely hope, Madam Speaker, that we do not end up with a toothless dog as regards quality audits. With this bill, we have in our little Mauritius the following authorities to cater for education from now onwards, if the bill is passed to the debates today. The Ministry of Education, the Tertiary Directorate of the Ministry of Education, the Higher Education Advisory Council, the Higher Education Commission, the Quality Assurance Authority, the Mauritius Qualifications Authority, where the only time it is mentioned in the bill is at paragraph 54.11, 4 amendments being brought to it. So it is mentioned only once in the bill. Otherwise, it does not appear anywhere else in the bill. It would appear that the Quality Assurance Authority is somehow leading to the MQA being forgotten. This is the impression that one gets while going through the bill. So, Madam Speaker, the creation of new institutions that has so far characterized the way in which this government works, does it not boil down to a recipe for modern management, or to provide, the Honorable Perrault said it in her own way, more jobs for the boys, that's my way of saying it, or more jobs for the girls? Because it would appear that we shall have some 4 additional chairmen and some over 30 additional nominees. I am just wondering what value addition would all those additional needed resources be with regards to their fees, their staff, office space, transportation requirement, etc., etc., etc. To my view, this seems to be an institutional messy situation with overlap and confusion of roles at a time when the United Nations Agenda 2030 is prompting countries to work towards sustainable development. This bill will clog the system until it chokes in a very unsustainable manner. As it is, Madam Speaker, critics, and I'm not referring to the most vociferous ones, are of the view that this bill seems to be a patchwork of contributions made by the various courtesans, constituents, each of them jockeying for positions in the sector. This is a felt perception. In order to rest my case further, Madam Speaker, I want now to draw the attention of the House to some extract to prove the hegemonious intent of this bill. Let us look at Section 3, but Section 3 has been deleted, and this is good, but we will remain with Section 52.1 and 51.10. At Section 52.1, and I quote, "The Minister may make such regulations as he thinks fit for the purposes of this Act," going on to Section 55.10, which states that where this Act does not make provision for any transition, the Minister may make such regulations as may be necessary for such transition. Madam Speaker, would the Honourable Minister, and therefore I would not want to press on her and to embarrass her, but I would kindly request her to tell us how she could singly, even she's given she may not be, but the law allows her to be the substitute for a whole institution and all that it represents. Is this not still too much power to a minister? In addition, Section 9.5 mentions that every member of the Board of the Higher Education Commission shall be paid such fees as the board may, with the approval of the minister, determine. So if I understand well, the minister would have a say on the final fees of the board. So this is another issue. Last but not least, with regard to this level, is the immunity of the board of members and staff of the commission and the authority that it is introduced with Section 43 on protection from liability, which states the following: "No liability, civil or criminal, shall be incurred by the Commission, the authority, a member of the Board of the Higher Education Commission, a member of the Board of the Quality Assurance Authority, an officer of the Commission, an officer of the authority, or a member of a committee in respect of any act done or omitted in good faith in the discharge of its or his functions or exercise of its or his powers under this Act." So therefore, Madam Speaker, when your grandchild and my child enters an organization that is under the purview of the Higher Education Commission and the QAA and is subject to mismanagement that has been allowed in good faith, this child can have no appeal, since nobody will ever be held responsible for erroneous decisions. So we come to see how the fractures are deepened at institutional levels. Let us move, Madam Speaker, to study the impact of this bill on the educational landscape of the country, and I shall prove how we can never have the modern legislative framework that this bill sets out to provide. I move to level 2 of my analysis, which is the macro level, deepening the fractures. Madam Speaker, let us think for a moment about the higher education setup as it is right now. It is managed by the Tertiary Education Commission and the Tertiary Education Directorate of the Ministry of Education. I keep wondering, how will the members to be appointed by the Prime Minister, having wide experience in the field listed, give policy directions in matters of higher education? Square pegs in round holes indeed. On those nominees, and I make a suggestion here, I see a lot of fields have been mentioned for the people that come from several fields. There is none from the medical side. At a time when we are dispensing medical courses at the university, there is no one from the medical background sitting on the boards. So this is something maybe I could suggest to the Honorable Minister. Anyhow, Madam Speaker, the Tertiary Education Commission was giving policy directions. The Ministry and the MQA was the necessary appendix. The MQA owns the National Qualifications Framework. This vital instrument has more to do with higher education, and every time the TEC has to carry out an initiative that impacted on the National Quality Framework, it had to seek permission from the MQA. No? So already we existed in an environment where we had to grapple with a fractured system. Instead of moving towards a harmonized system, this higher education bill serves to further fracture it. In a world where UNESCO, which drives educational agendas around the world, has been asking Mauritius to ratify the Addis Convention of 2014, we see that in this bill will do anything but to bring in harmony our higher education system. Now we have to deal with even more dangerous challenges. The fractured higher education system will now be directed and regulated by 3 new bodies: the Higher Education Advisory Council, the Higher Education Commission, and the Quality Assurance Authority. How will coordination be ensured between these 3 different bodies is a question I should like to put to the Honorable Minister tonight. Similarly, the Higher Education Commission will host a register that will be affected by the work done by the QAA, Quality Authority. Does that not tantamount to duplication of efforts? Is another question. Thus, according to Section 19, the Higher Education Commission will give policy directions and will develop the credit system frameworks separately, and the QAA will implement these separately. With time, one may predict that there can be a divergence between the two. The QAA, which appears to be subordinate to the HEC, will have to refer to the latter whenever it takes any decision that will surely have an impact on the HEC's register. So what was happening in open offices of one organization will now have to cross all the procedures and processes of 2 organizations. I am thinking about all the elements leading to the writing and presentation of, for example, a board paper. The board decision being taken, this being transmitted to the other organization to be dealt with in its own board meeting, instructions being given out, and so on. In fact, by giving statutory status to the different departments of the present TEC, or rather to 2 distinct functions of the present Quality Assurance and Accreditation Division of the present TEC, this bill seems to bring about a situation where these 2 functions will have hardly any dialogue between them. What used to be discussed in the corridors of one building will now be distanced by buildings, boards, and staffs. It seems that there has been an unprecedented introduction of cumbersomeness to existing processes. That's my opinion. On the other hand, Madam Speaker, with the MQA, which is the other player in the landscape, being the owner of the National Qualifications Framework, what are the provisions made in this bill for facilitating the work of the new HEC with regard to encrusting the credit system framework onto the NQF without having to constantly ask the MQA for permission? I have not seen any. Another matter that I find seriously worrisome is contained in Section 21.3, and I quote, "A private higher education institution may apply to the Commission to use the title university where the institution has offered courses leading to the award of a qualification leading to a bachelor degree or above and has awarded such qualification for the last 3 years. Now, there are many institutions that fall under the above category. Does this mean that we shall have further mushrooming of more universities in Mauritius? It has been evoked in the House earlier on. I think the Honorable Hariram has spoken about des champignons qui poussent après la pluie, or something like that. Are we going to have this kind of situation? Because he said we had it previously, and now we are bringing amendment that new top quality. This is what everybody says at the beginning, actually. Has any research been carried out with regard to the number of universities that a country of our size can carry? Do we have the wherewithal to build university cultures among all these institutions, or is the number of years of operation the only significant criteria for an institution to be called a university? I leave it up to you all, Madam Speaker and honorable members, to think about this. So now we come really to the bolts and nuts, the nitty-gritty of things, where the devil is in the details. So this is my level 3 of my analysis, the micro level, the seeds of the ungrowth. First, cultural life. At section 6, subsection G, states that the HEC will support the development of cultural life as part of its objects. What does that mean? How is a commission, which is an authority, going to nurture cultural life? Is a question I have tonight. Secondly, mix and match. As part of its function, the Commission is meant to, at paragraph 7F, to undertake periodic accreditation audits of higher education institutions, while at section 31.2, the authority shall, in the discharge of its functions under subsection 1, be responsible for B, driving improvements in the higher education sector. Madam Speaker, I am of the view that there is a cross-match of functions. I appeal to the Honourable Minister to have a closer look and to revisit, if needed, there. Also, we need to have define, demarcate, accreditation of audits as opposed to quality audit. Thirdly, the issue of code of conduct. The bill makes provision for section 8A to issue and enforcing of a code of conduct for students. But what about educators, teachers, lecturers, and other staff? Are they not part of the deal? Will the staff of the Commission and authority themselves be allowed to work in those very organizations, be it public or private, that they are supposed to audit? Do they not need a code of ethics to guide them in their professional life? On another note, Madam Speaker, documentary evidence is mentioned in section 16.8, where a person intends to operate a center or a branch campus in Mauritius as a separate entity from its overseas institution, he shall provide documentary evidence to the effect that strong academic linkages exist between the center or branch campus and the institution. In an era where electronic manipulation of documents is easily carried out, are we secure about documentary evidence as the only source of reliability? Will there not be due diligence conducted on those learning organizations? This is another suggestion I would like to make to the Honourable Minister, over and above documentary evidence, to conduct proper due diligence over those organizations so that we do not end up with what we have had in the past. Now, coming to quality audits, it seems there that our colonial mentality still persists in Section 38, where we expect that, first, the authority shall ensure that every higher education institution is subject to external quality audits against international yardsticks for benchmarking of performance. What if we do not meet international yardsticks because we have our very own which have not been made explicit? Are local requirements and dictates nowhere in the picture? On the other hand, I would like to see therein provisions that do not allow staff from the private tertiary institutions to participate in audits or quality assurance exercises of public institutions. This is highly unethical, and in the past, I've mentioned it before, in the past it has happened, and this government, I do believe, has allowed an ex-director of the tech to rope in a director of a private higher education institution to participate in quality assurance exercise of the Open University. I think this has happened before, I'm told. Such situations may give undue advantage to the private providers against our fledgling institutions. I now move to Section 14, Registrar of Commission. What is the purpose of a registrar and its exact functions? Is there not duplicata between the HEC and the QAA? How frequently has audits been carried out at the tech recently? Do we really need a quality assurance authority to carry out the audits? Is it not a wastage of funds to create this authority with an executive director and several staff in order to carry out quality assurance? The HEC is registering an institution and accreditation of a program, as is the case now. The criteria should be met before registration, and accreditation is done. Therefore, the creation of the QAA is only to ensure that qualities are being met after registration and accreditation, which can tantamount to waste of fund. Two last questions, Madam Speaker, before I move to my suggestions. No, because the Honorable Ratna has said we only criticize and we don't make suggestions. So I want to make suggestions.
You are not allowed to talk to any honorable member.
Sorry, yes. Yeah. What provision has been made in this bill to permit HEI from continuing its initiatives and endeavors to seek accreditation of program from I wanted to mention about the University of Mauritius, but I think this is, we'll pass over this. So my suggestions, a few ways of making progress. First, to have top businesses here moving on from sponsoring minor things and to concentrate on sponsoring postgraduate chairs and research and development in specialized technical departments. Secondly, to have top businessmen and women engaged in universities here in joint appointments to strengthen the academic business links and foster more engagement between town and gown. Third, top consultants, when they arrive here from abroad, either on EU, Commonwealth, UN, African Development Bank funding, should have built into their contracts postgraduate teaching and tuition roles. The students would learn much there, and there's nothing better than teaching from a consultant to improve their understanding of the field in which they work. Fourth, with the accent of inter-sector engagement, let's see the diplomatic corps play its role in mentoring and promoting research at postgraduate level, for they have much to offer in the field of political science, trade, and industry. And fifth, for those of you who are familiar with Singapore, we have to match salary with experience and qualification. I think this is important. Madam Speaker, we have arrived where we began, so before ending, I would like again to quote an extract from that speech I started with, the throne of 15 September 1967, where Sir Sivasagar Ramgoolam said, "We have given to this country a great many things that never existed before, which in fact are unique in Africa or in some Asian countries. We have provided old-age pension for people, a non-contributory pension, in fact. We have almost universal education, both primary, secondary, and a university which has just been born. That was then, when the University of Mauritius took off and slowly became a flagship. But today we have to build up that university again. I may have taken some time, I know it's late, but I associate myself with other members of the opposition who have spoken before me to say that a bill of such importance cannot be allowed to pass without a healthy dose of critique. The more so it has come for debate less than 2 weeks after having been circulated. We have seen tonight a whole paragraph has had to be removed, paragraph 3. We are talking about a bill which will take care of our children's higher education needs. We are talking about meeting the United Nations Sustainable Goals number 4, quality education, and working for a sustainable development. With this bill as it is, we will fall, I fear, short of that goal. On this note, I thank you for your attention.
Honorable